this queen could not seem to stop eating. She ate meat 4 times a day and drank as much as 24 litres of a sweet beverage made with 32 pounds, or almost 14.5 kilograms of sugar. Food became her refuge, her comfort, and perhaps the only pleasure left to her in a lonely and childless marriage. But in the end, the very thing that comforted her was also what killed her. In today's video, I will tell you the tragic story of Marie Louise of Orléans, the deeply unhappy wife of King Charles II of Spain. Together, we will try to understand whether she truly ate herself to death, or whether the real cause of her destruction was something far more complicated. Give this video a royal like, and let's begin. To understand the reasons behind Marie Louise's unhappiness, we first need to look at her childhood and her family tree, because it was precisely her noble birth that ultimately made her a victim. You are already somewhat familiar with the family of today's heroine. In my video about royal women and their gay husbands, I told you about the complicated relationship between the French Prince Philippe of Orléans and his wife Henrietta of England. Marie Louise was their daughter, although, once again, those of you who watched that video carefully may remember that Philippe's paternity remains an open question. His own wife had a passionate love affair with his brother, the Sun King Louis XIV, and many courtiers whispered that the king himself might actually have been the little girl's father. You have to admit, even the most scandalous television show or tabloid could hardly offer this level of drama. When the baby was born on the 26th of March, 1662, she became a complete disappointment to everyone. Or rather, her sex did. Henrietta looked at her daughter and said, "Throw her into the river." However, this was probably nothing more than an emotional outburst, because the French court was certainly not Sparta, and no one was actually going to treat a little daughter of France in such a way. The king's mother and the baby's grandmother, Anne of Austria, was present at the birth and quickly comforted Henrietta. She reminded her that the king already had a son, the Dauphin, and that this little girl could one day become the perfect bride for him and therefore the future Queen of France. And should your eyebrows have just risen in surprise, Anne of Austria belonged to the Habsburg family, the very dynasty I spoke about in my previous video. For her, the idea of marrying 2 cousins was considered perfectly normal. Although the little girl's life began with a scandal, she had a genuinely happy childhood. She was the favourite of her father and her royal grandmother, and she grew up surrounded by the luxury and carefree atmosphere of the French court, until fate dealt her its first terrible blow. When Marie Louise was only 8 years old, her mother died. Henrietta believed that she had been poisoned by one of her husband's lovers, and she died carrying a deep sense of hurt and betrayal. Strangely enough, her daughter would later repeat part of her fate, because Marie Louise's own premature death would also become surrounded by rumours of poisoning. A year later, Philippe married Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate. You may remember her as Liselotte if you watched the series Versailles. I could honestly talk forever about how wonderful she was, and what a fantastic presence she became at the French court. Among her many virtues, it is also worth mentioning that she treated the little orphan with great warmth, and the 2 of them developed a kind and affectionate relationship. By the age of 17, Marie Louise had grown into a remarkable beauty, which is hardly surprising when you look at the portraits of her parents, who practically look like supermodels. Contemporaries described her as of an elegant presence, of well-proportioned stature, with a serene and flattering countenance. And, naturally, Marie Louise became a very valuable piece on the royal marriage chessboard. But the girl's heart was already taken. She was in love with her own cousin, the Grand Dauphin. You may remember the words her grandmother had spoken at the time of her birth, predicting that she would one day marry him. And so Marie Louise grew up quite literally looking toward her cousin and already imagining herself as the future Queen of France. But, as always, politics interfered in matters of love. Her uncle, and possibly even her biological father, needed peace with Spain, so Charles II of the Habsburg dynasty was chosen as Marie Louise's husband. Charles had been born from the marriage of an uncle and his niece, and he was the victim of centuries of inbreeding that had gathered together almost every possible illness and physical defect ever found within his family. He could not speak until the age of 4 or walk until he was 8. Because of his Habsburg jaw and unusually large tongue, he could barely chew his food and suffered from constant drooling. He was also reported to experience frequent seizures and long periods of fever. His legs were so weak that they had to be supported with braces. In other words, the king would have been the dream patient of any doctor, provided that he had good private health insurance, because it would have been far easier to list the health problems he did not have than to describe all the ones he did. Naturally, the king's condition became the subject of endless rumours and gossip throughout the royal courts of Europe, and those stories eventually reached Marie Louise as well. In tears, she threw herself at the feet of her uncle the king, begging him to save her from such a fate. But the king replied that such behaviour was unworthy of her and that he could not have chosen a better match even for his own daughter. And with that, her fate was sealed. The marriage contract was signed, and the proxy wedding took place on August 30th, 1679. When she was leaving, the king feared that the princess might follow the example of her cousin, Marie Louise of Orléans, escape from her husband and return to France. And so he gave his niece a final farewell. Farewell, madame, and forever. And she truly would never see her native France again. I can only imagine what this young woman must have felt as she travelled to meet her husband. It was probably something like Belle going to meet the Beast, although that fairy tale had not yet been written at the time. What we do know is that Marie Louise remained silent throughout the entire journey. Fortunately, Charles, who may not have looked like a prince any more than the Beast from the fairy tale did, turned out to have a kind soul inside his damaged body. He fell madly in love with Marie Louise after seeing only her portrait and waited for her with such impatience that he even travelled out to meet her. But when the couple finally met, it became clear that they could barely understand one another. Charles spoke very indistinctly because of his speech impediment, while Marie Louise's Spanish was still far from perfect, so at first they had to communicate through an interpreter. Despite this, the two of them managed to build a warm and friendly relationship. Unlike many of the royal abusers whose stories we discuss on this channel, Charles genuinely tried to be a good husband to her, as much as his physical and mental condition allowed. But in every other respect, Marie Louise found herself in hell. The courtiers openly hated her. Anti-French feeling in Spain was extremely strong because the two countries had fought against each other for years, so even before Marie Louise set foot on Spanish soil, she was already seen as an enemy. Life at the Spanish court and its etiquette were also completely different from what she had known in France. In my video about Versailles, I told you that the French court had countless ridiculous rules about who was allowed to sit on which chair, who could speak to whom, and at what moment. But in Spain, all of these rules had been taken to the point of absurdity. No one was allowed to touch the Queen. Almost no one could speak to her freely. She spent most of her time isolated in her private chambers, and Marie Louise was even forbidden to look out of the window because no ordinary citizen was supposed to see her. But Marie Louise's greatest nightmare was the fact that the entire court expected her to produce an heir. Charles II was the only and final representative of the Spanish Habsburg line and the ruler of an enormous empire, so the need for a male child and the political stakes surrounding his birth could hardly have been higher. And although the couple did have sexual relations, which I honestly do not even want to imagine, Marie Louise failed to become pregnant throughout their 10 years of marriage. Once again, the real problem was her husband's health. Charles II was simply incapable of fathering children. After his death, the doctors who performed the autopsy discovered that the king had only one testicle, and even that one was not functioning. The physicians who examined his body wrote that it was black as coal. But during the marriage, Charles's subjects and relatives had not personally examined his testicles and did not know that the king had never had any real chance of producing children. So when no heir appeared, Marie Louise alone was blamed. A mocking rhyme soon began circulating through Madrid, which roughly meant either give birth in Spain or return to Paris. Doctors tried to treat the young woman and subjected her to various procedures that were supposed to help her conceive. But as you already know, none of them produced any result. Even though Marie Louise and Charles prayed every day for the birth of an heir. And so, food became the young woman's only comfort. Marie Louise began eating 4 times a day, with a particular preference for meat and sweets. She became especially fond of sweet drinks flavoured with lemon and cinnamon, which reportedly required 32 pounds of sugar to prepare, or approximately 14.5 kilograms. In one old Spanish culinary source, I even found a claim that the Queen drank 24 litres of these beverages every day. Naturally, with a diet like this, she quickly gained weight, which soon became yet another reason for people to mock her. The wife of the French ambassador wrote in one of her letters, "She has grown so fat that if it goes much further, her face will be round. Her bosom, strictly speaking, is already too full." But food did not only steal Marie Louise's beauty, little by little it also began to steal her health. Another person from her circle wrote that she was lately ill with fever owing to the rubbish she is always eating. Nobody can control her as she looks consumptive. Of course, looking at her story through modern eyes and with our current understanding of psychology, we can see that this poor woman was probably trying to escape her miserable life through food and may have suffered from some form of eating disorder. On the 11th of February 1689, the Queen was suddenly struck by terrible abdominal pain, followed by nausea and convulsions. After 2 days of agonizing suffering, she died. She was only 26 years old. Just as with the premature death of her mother, rumors of poisoning immediately began to spread. Suspicion fell on her mother-in-law, who was allegedly believed to have murdered her daughter-in-law, so that a new and more fertile woman could marry Charles. Modern scholars, however, have examined descriptions of Marie Louise's final days and concluded that she most likely died from appendicitis or food poisoning. In other words, it is entirely possible that she was ultimately killed by the very food that had given her the only comfort and consolation she could find in her miserable and childless life. On her deathbed, she told her confessor, "I am at peace, Father, and very glad to die." And as she said goodbye to Charles, she told him, "Many women may be with His Majesty, but none will love him more than I do." For Charles, Marie Louise's death was a devastating blow, although he was soon forced to marry again, once more in the hope of producing the heirs who were never destined to be born. Until the end of his life, Marie Louise remained his one and only love. In my previous video, we discussed how the greatest victim of the Habsburg dynasty was perhaps its most inbred princess, Maria Antonia. But when you think about it, Marie Louise can also be called a victim of this family. Like her husband's niece, she was placed under relentless reproductive pressure, subjected to humiliating treatments, and blamed for failing to produce an heir, even though the real cause of the couple's childlessness was Charles himself. And perhaps it was a mercy that they never had children, because it is terrifying to imagine the number of illnesses such a child might have inherited. And then the list of Habsburg victims and the number of graves they left behind might have been even longer. So, what do you think truly killed Marie Louise? Was it simply sugar and food, or was it the disastrous political alliance, the oppression, the hostility of the Spanish court and the system itself, which saw a woman as nothing more than a machine for producing heirs? I would love to hear your opinion in the comments, and I will see you in a new story very soon.